The following interview with Tony Dokoupil and LaVoy Finicum has been used far and wide on the internet to justify the killing of LaVoy Finicum, and to make the case that LaVoy Finicum had a death wish and intended to die in a gunfight with the FBI. Here I will analyze this interview and I will come to a different conclusion. This interview will not only reveal the plot to murder LaVoy Finicum, but it will also reveal the motive.
Tony, what's the situation there now?
Lawrence, I'm here with LaVoy Finicum. He's a 55-year-old rancher from Arizona, father of 11, and he says he believes there's a warrant out for his arrest, and he does not anticipate respecting that warrant. He's got a gun here under the blanket. And LaVoy, why don't you tell us what your plan is?
Well, first of all, let's get a little bit of things out here in front. The information may or may not be accurate, but it appeared to be highly credible that 5 warrants were issued for our arrest for me, for Ammon Bundy, for Ryan Bundy, and I'm not sure for the other 2, and by the FBI, federal warrants. And so if that is true, if that is the case, I do not want the FBI, federal agents, have to go running around in the dark, kicking in doors looking for me, okay? I want them to know exactly where I'm at.
There is a problem right at the start. There never was an arrest warrant for LaVoy. Tony Dokoupil should not have used LaVoy as a source for this information. He should have verified this information with the FBI and Oregon State Police. In a later statement, Tony uses weasel words to distance himself from the arrest warrant claim.
Let's presume that if there's not already a warrant out for your arrest, you are breaking the law occupying this federal property. So perhaps at some point there will certainly be a warrant.
This indicates that Tony knows that there is no arrest warrant, but is continuing to create the appearance of an arrest warrant in his interview.
And isn't it true that they didn't actually have a warrant for him at the time that they set up those roadblocks?
Correct. There were no warrants for any of the individuals. They didn't receive the warrants until the very next day, and they excluded the warrant for my husband because he had already been murdered by that point.
As Jeanette Finicum stated, LaVoy's name is not listed on the arrest warrant, and it was not filed until the day after LaVoy was killed. There was no arrest warrant for LaVoy. Of the 13 questions or comments made by Tony Dokoupil, 3 referred to an arrest warrant that did not exist. 5 of the questions explicitly used the word die or death.
So you're prepared to die. Better dead than in a cell. And so you're out here prepared to die, and who's got a death wish. And you've got a death wish. Is a gun, but you're prepared to die.
LaVoy, on the other hand, only uses the word death once.
I have no death wish. I love life.
And all of the questions imply either LaVoy will fight the FBI or die or both. Tony had a single agenda: to get LaVoy to incriminate himself and provide justification for the murder of LaVoy. Next, I will show just the questions asked by Tony Dokoupil, so you can see Tony's agenda.
Lawrence, I'm here with LaVoy Finicum. He's a 55-year-old rancher from Arizona, father of 11, and he says he believes there's a warrant out for his arrest, and he does not anticipate respecting that warrant. He's got a gun here under the blanket. And LaVoy, why don't you tell us what your plan is? So if they come here with an arrest warrant and they try to put cuffs on you, what's your plan? What do you think they're going to do, and what are you prepared to do? Let's presume that they're not. Let's presume that if there's not already a warrant out for your arrest, you are breaking the law occupying this federal property. So perhaps at some point there will certainly be a warrant. When that warrant comes down, when that arrest comes, what do you intend to do in response? So to avoid getting in that box, you're ready to do what? If they come here and try to arrest you, they point a gun at you, they try to put cuffs on you, how far are you willing to take this? So you're prepared to die. Better dead than in a cell. And so you're out here prepared to die over what principle exactly?
Legal government, okay?
There's a man over our shoulder here with a bulletproof vest on and an assault rifle, and there are 2 pieces of construction equipment that have been moved. The people who moved them say they're for protection. There's something to shoot behind. How well armed and how well prepared are you in there? You've got a family.
I do.
Have you said goodbye to them? Have you told them to prepare? You know, there are people who are watching this who are going to say to themselves, this man's a terrorist who's occupied someone else's property and who's got a death wish. Evidently, that's one of your fans. There are people who are watching this who would say to themselves, you're a terrorist,
Yes.
you've occupied land that's not your own, and you've got a death wish. There's a gun over your lap and you're asking for it. Okay, 19 and 2 on the way, so you've got something to live with,
I have something to live
but you're
for.
prepared to die. Okay, Lawrence, that's
Tony,
the best word here. Back to you.
Could you just ask him what his reaction is to the Mormon Church condemning his actions there?
Yes, LaVoy, what's your reaction to the Mormon Church, you're Mormon, condemning your actions here and the actions of your colleagues? All right, Lawrence, back to you.
Tony Dokoupil, thank you very much. We'll be right back.
During the interview, LaVoy did fall into Tony's trap and said some things that could be considered incriminating. Here is the sequence that is incriminating to LaVoy.
So if they come here with an arrest warrant and they try to put cuffs on you, what's your plan?
Well, they're not going to just come up with a guy holding a rifle and put cuffs on him, okay? They're not going to do that.
What do you think they're going to do, and what are you prepared to do?
Well, I hope that they go home. That's what I hope they do.
Let's presume that they're not. Let's presume that if there's not already a warrant out for your arrest, you are breaking the law occupying this federal property. So perhaps at some point there will certainly be a warrant. When that warrant comes down, when that arrest comes, what do you tend to do in response?
I have been raised in the country all my life. I love dearly to feel the wind on my face, to see the sunrise, to see the moon in the night. I have no intention of spending any of my days in a concrete box. And so I will, whatever days, and I believe that there'll be many, and hopefully prosperous days to come, I will spend them riding my horses, trying to take care of my cows, and that's what I will do. But I will not spend it in a box.
So to avoid getting in that box, you're ready to do what?
You guys have so many hypotheticals.
If they come here and try to arrest you, they
Yes.
point a gun at you, they try to put cuffs on you, how far are you willing to take this?
Well, don't point a gun at me. You don't point a gun at somebody unless you're going to shoot them. That's the first thing your thought is, don't point guns at people. And so I'm telling them right now, don't point guns at me.
So you're prepared to die, better dead than in a cell?
Absolutely. Dude, would you like to be in a cell? Nobody wants to live their life in a cell. Absolutely, I'm not going to live my life in a cell.
The most incriminating statements that LaVoy made were these.
I have no intention of spending any of my days in a concrete box. Absolutely. Dude, would you like to be in a cell? Nobody wants to live their life in a cell. Absolutely, I'm not going to live my life in a cell.
Many in the mainstream news media have taken this to mean that LaVoy has a death wish. When you hear LaVoy's comments independent of Tony Dokoupil's words, they do not sound so bad. It is Tony that inserted the most offensive statements about death in order to spin LaVoy's words. There is another interpretation of the statement, "I'm not going to live in a cell," that must be considered. In this country we have the principle of innocent until proven guilty. LaVoy may believe that he has not broken the law and will eventually win if this goes to court. If this sounds far-fetched, then recognize that the other people who were arrested and pleaded innocent were found innocent of all the charges. Specifically, Ryan Bundy and Shauna Cox defended themselves in a court that showed extreme bias against them and won their case. It is very likely that LaVoy would also have won in court for the same reason, and would not have lived in a cell because his legal theory was correct. Later I will show that the government's actions indicate that they also believe that LaVoy's legal theory is correct. Here are some questions that show clearly how Tony is trying to put words into LaVoy's mouth and force the issue of LaVoy dying.
So to avoid getting in that box, you're ready to do what?
You guys have so many hypotheticals.
Even if LaVoy talks about his family, Tony spins it into LaVoy dying.
You've got a family.
I do.
Have you said goodbye to them? Have you told them to prepare for the
No,
worst?
I haven't told them to prepare.
You've got a death wish. There's a gun over your lap and you're asking for it.
I have no death wish. I love life. I have 20 grandkids. Actually, I have 19 and 2 on the way.
Okay, 19 and 2 on the way. So you've got something to live with.
I have something to live
but
for.
You're prepared to die.
I'm prepared to defend freedom.
There is one charge that everyone should agree is reasonable, and that is trespassing.
If there's not already a warrant out for your arrest, you are breaking the law occupying this federal property. So perhaps at some point there will certainly be a warrant.
However, the arrest warrant obtained after LaVoy's murder does not list trespassing at all. Instead, it lists a ridiculous conspiracy charge that the federal government failed to prove in court. Since the federal government usually stacks as many charges as they can, the absence of a trespassing charge is remarkable. Furthermore, if they want to get the occupiers off the land, a trespassing charge is the most logical first step. The only reason that the federal government would not charge them with trespassing is that they could not prove trespassing. And the only reason that the federal government could not prove trespassing is if they did not lawfully own the land. This is what LaVoy Finicum and Ammon Bundy were claiming from the start.
Did the federal government do anything to prove ownership?
She said this, that it doesn't have any impact on the charges, so we're not going to argue whether that's what it was. And because they charge us for conspiracy to impede federal officers through threat, intimidation, and force. That was the charge. And so she said that, the jurisdiction over the land had no, bearing on this trial. See, every time we've gone into a federal court and begin to argue the jurisdiction, they won't have that argument. They'll either say, that argument's moot, or they'll just say that doesn't pertain to the charges. What we were trying to do also at the refuge was provoke a trespass charge.
Clearly you were expecting a legal confrontation.
Yeah, we were trying to provoke.
How did you hope that would go down?
How would you hope? It would have to be a trespass charge, right?
That's what I thought.
We weren't doing anything else except just being there occupying. We weren't hurting anybody. We weren't threatening anybody. None of that. All that was a lie. But they did not want to have that argument, so they did not charge us with trespassing. Because the trespassing charge would have been like a misdemeanor or something.
Okay.
I wouldn't have been thrown in prison for 2 years.
Right.
While I was trying to fight these charges. It would have been something I could have done outside. I could have got tens of thousands of people behind me. They're going to charge us with trespassing. And then we're going to fight the trespass charges with all the proof that we have that the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was taken, unethically, unlawfully, that they didn't have jurisdiction. But they knew we were going to make that argument. They didn't want to have that argument, so they just made up all this threat, intimidation, force, and that's part of where the media came in, saying that we were these armed, occupiers, and that we were, impeding and threatening federal officers. It was all a lie. It was also that they didn't have to have the argument of jurisdiction.
Ammon Bundy and LaVoy Finicum believe that the federal government does not lawfully own the land at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, and that Oregon is the rightful owner. They are trying to provoke a trespass charge so that they can argue the issue of ownership in court. Suppose first that Ammon Bundy and LaVoy Finicum are wrong. What should happen? The FBI should get an arrest warrant for trespassing. The government should easily prove trespassing in court. Ammon Bundy and LaVoy Finicum would voluntarily go to court because this is what they want. The federal government would then present evidence to show that they own the land. They would win in court, settling the issue of ownership. However, none of this happened. The survivors were not charged with trespassing. No arrest warrant was obtained for LaVoy, and the government avoided addressing the issue of ownership in court, never proving ownership. Now suppose that Ammon Bundy and LaVoy Finicum are correct, and the federal government does not lawfully own the land. The federal government could not charge them with trespassing. In fact, they would not have broken any laws by being on the wildlife refuge, and the FBI would not be able to get a warrant, except possibly on made-up charges. The federal government would avoid the issue of ownership at all costs. This is what happened. This is a match. In addition, The FBI created the illusion of an arrest warrant through psyops with Tony Dokoupil, and they put bogus charges on the arrest warrant after the murder. There was an absence of real charges. And the FBI had to wait for LaVoy to leave the refuge for the ambush. To be clear, this does not prove that Ammon and LaVoy are correct. That would have to be decided in court. All this proves is that the government attorneys believe that Ammon and LaVoy are correct, because the actions of the federal government are consistent with not having ownership of the land. There are two main points that Tony is presenting to us in this interview. There is an arrest warrant for LaVoy, and LaVoy has a death wish. The existence of an arrest warrant was false, and the death wish came from Tony's words and not from LaVoy. Since these statements were factually incorrect, and these statements could easily have been checked, and these statements were not checked, and there is evidence that Tony knew these statements were false, Tony Dokoupil has earned MSNBC the title of fake news. This interview was spread by many sources with a heavy spin on LaVoy dying, spinning his words into things that he never said. This psyop was not only used to spin public opinion, it was also used on the Oregon State Police to radicalize them into killing LaVoy. Officer 2 describes watching a video about LaVoy Finicum that fits the description of this video. I had seen videos in which he stated that he wasn't going to go to prison and didn't plan on being taken alive. Later, Officer 2 states, "I got on the radio and informed the team to the north, we are going to have to shoot him." Later, Officer 2 states, "My scope just came up and was right in the middle of the back of Mr. Finicum, and I squeezed off a single round." Watching this video influenced Officer 2 to make a premature decision to kill LaVoy, and he then fired one of the 3 shots into LaVoy's back, which killed him.
It was also testified to at that point that officer number 2, who had fired that round into the vehicle, radioed ahead to officer number 1 that was waiting at the kill stop about a mile ahead. And he says, "We're going to have to kill Finicum." Why? Why would an officer radio ahead to another officer stating that they're going to have to kill Finicum at that point? What did he do? Was there a warrant for his arrest? No. Had he broken any laws? No. And you will hear in part 2 how they admit to them not breaking any laws, that there were no state laws broken, that there were no federal laws that they knew of that they had broken, that Washington was trying to come up with some.
Since January 2nd, the FBI has worked in partnership with Harney County and our law enforcement partners across the state to resolve the situation at the refuge. Since that time, hundreds and hundreds of FBI employees traveled to Burns with the sole purpose of bringing this situation to a peaceful conclusion.
Now we will look at the timeline of the events. On January 2nd, the operation started. On January 6th, the interview with Tony Dokoupil was released. On January 26th, LaVoy was killed. On January 27th, an arrest warrant was issued for the survivors. The interview with Tony Dokoupil was released very early in the operation. This suggests that the murder of LaVoy was Plan A. This was not a secondary plan or an afterthought or an accident. The primary reason for the hundreds and hundreds of agents was to kill LaVoy. What other tasks might these hundreds and hundreds of agents had? Before the murder, nobody got an arrest warrant. Nobody attempted to prove that the federal government lawfully owned the land at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. Nobody attempted to fight the adverse possession claim. Nobody attempted to file trespassing charges against the occupiers. These were all things that logically should have been done. Apparently, nearly all of these hundreds and hundreds of agents were there to kill LaVoy.
This operation, obviously, the intent was to arrest the leadership of the group that was occupying the refuge.
Although the intent to arrest is refuted by the lack of an arrest warrant, we can assume that the remaining statement is true, that the FBI was targeting the leadership of the occupation. The information that LaVoy repeated in the interview was clearly false and was planted information. However, it will tell us who the FBI perceived as the leadership and who they saw as a threat.
The information may or may not be accurate, but it appeared to be highly credible that 5 warrants were issued for our arrest for me, for Ammon Bundy, for Ryan Bundy, and I'm not sure for the other 2.
There already was a pending case against Ammon and Ryan Bundy for the events in Bunkerville. Because LaVoy was the only one of these 3 that the FBI did not have a way to take down, LaVoy was the natural target of this assassination. It is interesting to note that LaVoy was not targeted for being guilty. LaVoy was specifically targeted for being innocent. Because of LaVoy's innocence, the FBI had no other way to take down LaVoy other than to kill him.
So the concept of the operation was approved by myself, but it was briefed both up through the Oregon State chain and through the federal government FBI chain. So they were aware of that at the highest levels at the FBI and also within the state of government, state of Oregon government.
Now I will summarize the motives for the assassination of LaVoy Finicum. LaVoy was one of 3 people identified as leaders. Of these 3 people, LaVoy was the only one that the FBI had no other way to take down. To get the occupiers off of the refuge without proving ownership of the refuge, the FBI killed LaVoy to terrorize the remaining occupiers into leaving the refuge. The FBI needed a diversion large enough to overshadow the issues of jurisdiction and ownership of the land. If the FBI failed and was forced to fight the issue of ownership of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge in court, the federal government believed that it would lose, and the BLM would lose control of vast amounts of land when it returned to state control. Next, I will summarize the motives of the Tony Dokoupil psyop. This psyop created the illusion of an arrest warrant in the public view in place of a real arrest warrant. This psyop provided propaganda to vilify LaVoy in the public view, preparing their minds to accept and approve of the murder of LaVoy. The psyop provided propaganda to radicalize the Oregon State Police, who were used as patsies in the murder of LaVoy Finicum. LaVoy was the specific target of an assassination that was premeditated and was planned before January 6, 2016, which is 20 days before LaVoy was killed by the FBI. The interview by Tony Dokoupil was a media psyop intended to create the illusion of an arrest warrant, to spin public opinion against LaVoy, and to gain public approval of the murder of LaVoy Finicum. The FBI murdered LaVoy Finicum to keep the issue of jurisdiction of the wildlife refuge out of the courts.
I
have something to live
but
for.
You're prepared to die.
I have something to live
but
for.
You're prepared to die.
I have something to live
but
for.
You're prepared to die.
I have something to live
but You're
for.
prepared to die.
I have something to live
but You're
for.
prepared to die.
I have something to live
but You're
for.
prepared.